Okay. So we'll move into public questions and comments. We'll let these guys get settled here first, Harvey. So just to remind everybody, we are on TV and on the web, and so we need you to come up, take your turn out and speak into the microphone. And we'd like you to state your name and your affiliation before you start off with your question. So, Harvey, I think they're settled. Why don't you go ahead?
My name is Harry Karshikoff. I'm from Nundalton, and I'm born and raised around there. And I was here. Thank you for letting me come here and to speak my mind of how I feel about the mine and the information I'm getting from here. And reason why Nundalton is where it's at is for the animals in the water and the fish. And that's why we want to learn more about the impact of the mine. And I was wondering about the plants of what the caribou eat and the moose. And I know there was a whole bunch of caribou in Dalton, but they're gone now. But the elder said they'll be back when the food grows again. And I was wondering about if they did any studies about groundhog and jackrabbits and owls, because that's where they hang around in the mountain where the mine site is. And there's some people that's for the mine and some people that's against the mine, and it affects the village people. And these meetings that we're having right now is good for us to learn more about it. And I might have some more questions later on. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about getting your name wrong, Harry. There were some questions about caribou forage and about some specific animals in the vicinity of the mine site.
Yes, I can try to answer some of those. You write down here. So it's caribou and moose forage and groundhogs. By that, I'm assuming that the species would be hoary marmot and jackrabbit. My understanding is that that's the local name for what scientists call a tundra hare or Alaska hare. And I mentioned yesterday there was only one sighting of, one on our surveys and then another reported to us of what was probably a tundra hare in the mine area. So it's difficult. They appear to be rare in that area. And it's difficult to get solid population information on rare species like that without intensive studies, which weren't done for this. We know they occur there. The absolute abundance or the population level is not known, and that's a pretty difficult thing to get at. But we know they're there, and we know that hoary marmots are there at the higher elevations. But apart from presence, species presence, we don't have good numbers on the populations in the area. In terms of caribou and moose forage, I think that my understanding of the question was, what's the relationship between the caribou population level and the available food? And that's an open question with regard to the Mulchetna caribou herd. This herd has gone through a dramatic population fluctuation over the last 30 years, about a tenfold increase and almost as much decrease. And they ranged over a really large area. The Department of Fish and Game has gathered anecdotal reports or observations from biologists in the field of areas of especially winter range that were heavily impacted by the really high population density. And that's the thinking is, as I understand it, that's one of the possible contributions to the population decline of that herd was range overuse, heavy impact on lichens, winter forage lichens in various portions of the winter range. Summer range, I don't think that's as well known. Lichens take a long time to regrow, and so in some places it's in the interior on the order of 50 to 80 or even more years for lichens to recover. In more coastal areas, that recovery can happen more quickly. But I mentioned that the Mulchatna herd was noteworthy for the extreme range of movements and unpredictability of movements that had been observed as the herd grew and then began to decline. They would move into areas of range that hadn't previously been used, and it's a bit speculative on biologists' part because it's difficult to monitor forage plants over a huge area like that. But the thinking was that was probably, at least in part, in relation to overutilization of food in certain areas of range. Moose, I don't know if anyone's really done any work on moose forage in the area, forage abundance. And that was not part of the the baseline studies for this project. I mean, we know that they use willows heavily. There are methods for examining browse removal by moose. That's a fairly intensive study effort. It hasn't been done in the area of the mine.
Yep.
Oh, was owls? I don't think there were specific studies done of owls. But they were
No,
surveys.
I think probably one of the prominent species would be short-eared owl that would forage in open areas up near the proposed mine site. There were not specific surveys for owls, but they were observed. Again, it's similar to the tundra hare. There were incidental observations as the surveys weren't focused on those species. So they are there. Currently, they're considered a species of conservation concern. There's concerns about population declines in that species broadly, not necessarily in Alaska. I think some of those data are from the lower 48, where populations are more closely monitored. So they're there. We don't know the details on their foraging habits right now because those specific studies haven't been done.
So I've got a question maybe for both of you. Todd kind of was wondering about subsistence information. I know that was a different group that did the subsistence studies, but was there communication and integration? Did you guys use any of those studies to inform the work you were doing?
In terms of study design or which species were looked at, I mean, use for subsistence was certainly a consideration in examining or in selecting the list of species of concern that were used in the habitat evaluation, caribou, moose, I mean, obvious things like that. But in terms of some sequence of having subsistence studies which then fed information directly into the wildlife, not per se. I mean, these studies were proceeding concurrently.
Okay, yeah, that's basically what we were asking.
Okay.
Other questions from the audience? The mic is available. Well, I guess you guys have been very thorough.
Yeah.
It's
too early.
What's that?
Yeah, I have one question if I may ask. My name is Val Goodman. For owls, I'm not an expert on owls myself, but I heard that there is invasion of some species going on that are moving northwards. Could you speak about, is there any indication that we have that also for the study area? Because there seems to have been a change of species setup over time just recently in Alaska. Perhaps you can speak about it.
I'm not aware that there's been an invasion of new species in this particular area. So I guess the answer is no at this time.
Which species are you referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can
curious.
give you a species in a moment myself, but I know that among owl experts there is a discussion that some species came in because of agriculture and so on in Alaska, and that has been a recent change. I know there has been a change in Fairbanks, and so that's my question if that has happened there too, but I don't have the specifics in the moment in my head, but I think it's something. I'm bringing it up because if you talk about a change of like an impact or something, the question then is that an impact or is it just a statewide change
Right.
of species?
So these are species that were not recorded in Alaska
No,
historically?
I think it's just a range change.
Yeah, okay.
So I think we had another audience question. If you could start off with your name and your affiliation.
My name is William Trayford. I'm originally from Nundalton. I live in Port Ellsworth, and I just, I am in between, for the mine and against the mine, and there's a lot of study that was going on, on the mine, and I was wondering if some of them is just natural causes or causes from the mine activity. So, what is the difference, between starting the mine and what will, we should be looking out for, to protect the environment. There's a lot of study on, all the animals, and I was wondering about any study on the people, because we're getting lesser and lesser people in our area. Why are they moving? To me, they're moving because they need jobs. And there's no jobs in the area. In the past, we used to trap and sell our furs, and trapping was no more good. So they went to started fishing, and then they started a permit system. And next thing we know, we were left without permits, so we can't fish in the bay no more. So we got to look for something else to, keep our people in the area employed, and we want to do it in the safest way we possibly could. We're still, environmentalist people back there, and if the mine could do it, the way they said they could do it in a safe way, I am one will be for it, because I want to see my people employed. Thank you.
Thanks, William. Todd, we still have the video from the last panel meeting available on the website? Yes. Okay. So I'll just say, William, that part of the last panel, there were some studies of the communities and the local economies, and that's available on the website. But I'll turn over the parts of this question for natural fluctuations and what to look out for in terms of things of concern to the consultants in the panel.
I'm a little unsure of the question. It was mainly a socioeconomic question regarding.
Well, there was that was the second part of the question, but the first part of the question was about
Separating.
natural fluctuations and things to watch out for mine impacts. Is that right, William?
So if I understand it correctly, it's how do you separate natural population fluctuations from potential impacts of a mine, and that's a really tough question. Biologists struggle with that all the time because populations change naturally. For instance, the Mulchetna caribou herd was an incredible increase and decrease over a period of 30 years, biologists have some hunches about why that happened, but they don't have, good cause-effect relationships. It's a real challenge. This is why, a lot of the discussion so far has looked at how do you design population monitoring. If at some point in the future you're going to look for a change in population, you have to design studies in a certain way now. Even then, if you find a change in the future, there's three possibilities. Something's going to decrease, it's going to increase, or it's going to stay the same. And trying to attach a specific cause to that is very difficult. I'll let anybody else weigh in here. It's not a slam dunk. I mean, that's why you try to bring multiple lines of evidence to these investigations, the trace elements. If you have good information on that and you see certain increases and then associated population level effects on reproduction or something like that, then you can be fairly confident you can draw a connection. It takes a well-designed, carefully done study.
Maybe I can clarify it a little, or maybe I can muddy the waters. But it's a good question. If we'll say the mine becomes functional and 10 years into the mine or something, some survey makes note that some species, whatever it is, doesn't seem to be as abundant as it was before the mine or whatever started. And then people start wondering, okay, what happened here? Why has this population declined? Well, it's an obvious question that needs an answer. And what typically happens in a situation where you have some major disturbance caused by people, whether it's an oil spill or a chemical plant explosion or a mine, to look at previous studies that have been done to get a sense of a trend. You do a trend analysis, and you look at all the studies going back as far as you can. And if you can detect that this population has been going down before people noticed it was down, you have a trend which probably had other causes. If you find that the population was stable or increasing and all of a sudden went down, then that's pretty good coincidental information. Something unusual has happened. And that's the kind of analysis that you go through when you're trying to determine what is causing this aberration out there, this unusual thing that you're finding. It's kind of like detective work. You get into the literature, you may have to design an experiment to see if this theoretical thing even has a basis. It's all part of the investigation. And if you find that there is probable cause, in other words, something is going on here. There wasn't a trend before, but suddenly something bad's happening. Then you can do an experiment, a controlled experiment, to expose some test animal group to the toxic substance that you think is responsible or something like that. And you can get supportive information, or you can get information that says, this isn't the answer. And you keep working at it. It's not an easy question to answer, but there are a variety of ways of evaluating it. It does take time, and it has to be done carefully. I don't know if that helps or anything.
Yeah, if I may add to this, I mean, I don't think it's so much rocket science, really, because consider that there's finite space. You only have that study area, and you can decide if there are trees or if there is a building. So, I mean, as long as you work on a finite space, which we know it's finite, it's just a time. It's a location. You can decide if you have the house, like here, or if you have the trees. I mean, if there are no trees, you can't have both. You cannot have a house and a tree at the same place. So, I think it's relatively simple to say we cannot have both. Okay, that everybody understands that you can have both. And the idea of the question how you make both sides happy is an interesting one. History has shown, though, that we have been really poor in combining both. And that's my message to you, is that you can have both as long as the space is finite. Okay, one has to give.
I'd like to add that it's important to study the common species as well as the rare ones. And that's one of the weaknesses in what has been done so far, the emphasis has been on the species of concern, which are by definition the rarest species and the ones that are most difficult to study. And it's important to look at some of the common species, because some of those may be some of the ones that show you the first declines, because there are so many of them and you can see that they're going down, whereas with the rare ones you hardly see them at all anyways, and you don't notice when they become rarer because they are so rare to start with.
I would agree with that. One of the things that you can do, this is why these studies are difficult, is to set up a reference site where you can monitor population trends that are independent of a mine site. There's not been a mine developed there, and then you have the mine site. And if you can do those studies simultaneously, you may be able to disentangle natural fluctuations in populations at your reference site from what's happening at the mine site, at least theoretically. But there are problems with that as well. But it's another approach that has been taken to these sorts of studies in the past.
And just to clarify, data were collected on all species, common and uncommon. What you're talking about for species of concern is a sort of a generic term that was developed for use in the habitat evaluation. From what I was hearing yesterday, the recommendation was to expand that to all species, and that can be done.
All right, do we have another question from the audience? Well, what do you think? Yeah, the panelists? Break time? Okay, go
It
ahead.
came up earlier in the contamination discussion. Do we have any good record of historical contamination levels? So, for instance, when you go back to the lake sediments, look in the sediment core, what has been the record of whatever copper or any metal you want to work on? Has it been taken into account the historical, like say 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years ago? Have been taken any cores? Do you know? I didn't see that, but I think it would be a wonderful time reference to see for impacts later on, you know. So looking a little bit into the archaeological record. And this is not only the lake sediments, but it would also be even the midden sites. Some of the midden sites of subsistence harvest can be used for this type of work. That's my question.
Looks like Jane is going to respond.
Yeah, we did do sediment samples in various locations at Lake Iliamna, but they're more like, you know, the 10 to 16, 18-inch depth into the sediments, and they're really not really related to a archaeological record where you can date and correlate the results to hundreds or thousands of years ago. And so it was kind of the more standard sediment sample collection that you would do to characterize concentrations. So the answer is we can't really correlate that to the geology or historical record.
Jane, could I ask for a clarification? Are you saying they were really shallow, so you only have a few years, or are you saying that you didn't look at annual layers?
They're shallow, and we didn't core. We didn't actually drill a core of sediment and then analyze layers and date those layers and determine concentrations at different periods of history.
Okay, thanks. That was Jane Whitsett with Pebble Limited Partnership. Other questions from the panel? 15-minute break for coffee, I guess.